Stewart, as CEO of the National Robotarium, when you hear that technology leaders are sceptical about the potential success of AI regulation, do you think that's misplaced?
No, not entirely. I think regulation is one way of making sure that we get these things right. We've had a history over, particularly in recent decades, of introducing new technologies and trying to use different ways to make sure that we get the maximum benefit and the minimum harm. I think what we find is that regulation is one part of it, but it's not the only way that we make this happen. I think there's a responsibility on politicians, there's a responsibility on the product developers and the engineers, the tech leaders, but there's also a responsibility on the public at large to be aware of the technology and understand how it can be used and where any dangers might lie. So I think it's quite a complex thing to get these things right, and I think we still haven't got it right for certain technologies that have been with us for a couple of decades now, social media, etc. It's going to take time and it's going to take a collaborative effort to get it right, but I think if we focus in on the benefits and we work towards those benefits while being very conscious of the potential dangers, and don't just regulate for those, but think about how we make sure that those are not built into anything, then I think we've got a chance of getting it right.
Obviously, you've got the benefit of talking to any number of different people across industry, but also from the public sector.
Yeah.
Do you think the UK's got the right ideas around regulation?
Depends what we're trying to regulate. So if we look at what's happened over the last 12 or 18 months around AI, I think we've made big strides in the right direction because we've actually wakened up to the issue and we're starting to think about it and talk about it. And there's been a few initiatives started, but it still feels a little bit knee-jerk and not fully thought out. So I think over time, we as the thinkers in our community and in our society will actually get our heads around what this is all about. It's very new. It brings new challenges and new opportunities, but like any new technology. But for this one, it's a bit different from some of the previous ones. You know, it's less hardware based, it's more some software based, but it's also something that people have not encountered in any form before. So it's going to be very interesting to see how we, both as individuals, but as communities of people, whether that's as nations or even more widely, actually get to grips with the whole thing. So yeah, there's still a lot of work to do and a lot of maturing, I would suggest, that we need to do. If we're looking at robotics as separate from AI, I think there has been a lot of thought into that, and there's been a lot of research done into the ethics associated with robotics. We have a Centre for Doctoral Training here that's focused purely on trusted AI or trusted autonomous systems for robotics. So that shows that I think there's a bit more maturity around that, and I think that's probably testament to the fact it's a little bit easier to think about robotics than it is to think about this slightly nebulous thing that's called artificial intelligence.
Where politicians are being prodded into finding the answers, do you think they're finding the correct answers?
I think there's promise there. I don't think we've got the complete answer yet because the technology is maturing and the applications are maturing and our attitude to all of that is maturing. So I think if we look back in the way that governments in the past have reacted to this kind of thing, they're usually reactive rather than proactive. They're usually slow to really understand what's going on and to understand where the protections and limitations should be introduced. So I think we're going through that phase with this technology. I think whether it's AI, whether it's robotics using AI, we're going through that phase with the technology. I'd be surprised, and I wouldn't blame any politician for not fully understanding what the potential is and what it's going to mean for society as a whole as we go forward. But I think it's incumbent on people like me and other people particularly in the UK, to be trying to help them to understand a little bit more. And it's not just the politicians, it's the researchers, it's the companies that are building products using these technologies that have a responsibility to make sure that they are considering the impact that it's going to have and making sure that that impact is as positive as it can be, as many times as it possibly can be.
Could scaremongering damage the UK's ability to compete?
Definitely. Definitely. I think we're starting from a fairly low base. We don't rank particularly highly in any of the metrics around either the production of robotics or the utilization of robotics for our economy. And we need to be very careful about helping everyone to, and I mean everyone, the public at large, the engineers, the policymakers, everyone to properly understand what these technologies can and can't do, but more importantly, how they can be harnessed and how we can use them for benefit. And as a result of that and getting that right, I think we'll actually be able to overcome any scaremongering. I think it's a policy of education and information. It's certainly one of the things we're trying to do here at the National Robotarium is reach out to the public at large to help them better understand and make informed decisions about what robotics is going to mean. People rightly worry about jobs, and they worry about the future and things getting out of control. And they should worry about that. Not because it's necessarily a massive threat, but because it should be considered so that we avoid those issues. I personally believe that the opportunities and the potential for robotics and AI far outweigh any concerns that we would have about the implementation, the way that it can enhance people's lives, the way that it can overcome a number of societal issues that we have, particularly for the aging and elderly population that we're going to have in the future. I think all of those need to be exploited and used, otherwise what's the alternative? But in doing that, we need to make sure that there's a proper understanding of the technology and its use and what it can do for everyone.
So you talk about education and outreach.
Yeah.
How best do we educate the general population, be it via the National Robotarium or industry, to make sure that people understand the issues involved?
Well, I think, you asked earlier about whether our politicians are getting it right. I think there's an element of what we need to do in the UK as a whole, which is about informing and educating around robotics and AI. And that can be done in a number of different ways. We can do it through our education system, our formal education system at schools or in further education or higher education, but we can also do it in other ways through seminars and targeted things. So I think doing all of that education and helping people to understand enough that they can make decisions for themselves and they can form their own views is the right way to go, rather than trying to preach one way or the other about this is all great or there's problems everywhere. It's really about education rather than sending a message.
When a company walks through the doors to this facility and meet you, what's at the forefront of their mind? Are they thinking about the effect of the technology that they're building on workers and the general population?
Oh yeah, very much so, yeah. I think they're thinking about two things. They're thinking about the benefit for their business and how they keep their business sustainable, how it survives and competes and grows, which is what every business is looking at. But I think these days businesses are smart enough to realise that only works if you've got a harmonious workforce that's bought into what you're trying to do. And so, yeah, the first question is, can I use robots to make my business better? The second question is, but what's that going to mean for my workforce and what do we have to do to sort that out?
If it wasn't for the benefit of the business, would that second part of the question unfortunately fall by the wayside and they'd still press ahead? Or do you think people genuinely would be influenced that if this isn't good necessarily for workers and for people, that they would stop and rethink about what they're doing?
That's a difficult question to answer because I can't put myself inside every organisation.
Yeah, of course.
But I think in general, certainly from my experience in industry over more than 40 years now, I think companies are smart enough to realise that you can't do these kind of things in isolation. You can't just push ahead with the introduction of robotics without thinking about what it means for your workforce. And that's not just about replacing people with robots. It's about what does your workforce look like when you've got robots and people working side by side. Mm-hmm. And that's particularly important in areas like healthcare, where in the future we'll have nursing assistants working alongside nurses, making it easier for nurses to do the things that they've been trained to do and spend less time doing the things that take the time away from being with a patient. And that's a huge benefit. That's something that everyone's crying out for. So when that's in place, the real question is, what does that feel like for individual nurses when they're working alongside a robotic nursing assistant, for example?
What do you think the future impact of robotics and AI is likely to be on the workforce?
I think if we get it right and we concentrate on the right utilisation, it's going to be really positive. It's going to allow us to move people out of jobs that they don't particularly want to be doing, those jobs that are repetitive, those jobs that are dangerous, It's going to allow us to then replace that with opportunities to work in more skilled jobs, more interesting jobs. But it's also going to allow us to create new jobs that don't exist right now, jobs that are associated with robotics, whether that's design and development, whether it's manufacturing or maintenance. So there's going to be quite a mix. I think if we look at technologies that have been introduced over many decades in the past, picking, for example, the introduction of aircraft, there wasn't an aircraft industry before aircrafts were invented and started to be adopted. That's had a positive impact in terms of creating jobs, opportunities for many, many decades, and will continue into the future. And I think robotics and AI will be very similar to that. But the other thing that aircraft did was it replaced other modes of transport. And so, ocean-going liners went out of business. But we'll see exactly the same thing with this. I think the positive thing is that as a civilization, mankind has always managed to evolve through these technology changes. This one I think is going to be very significant, but I think at the end of it, if we do it correctly, then we'll come out with a lot more benefits than problems.